I used to believe that family heirlooms carried memories, not danger. If someone had told me that a simple silver ring could make strangers watch my every move, I would have laughed and gone back to work. Looking back now, I wish I had listened. The morning everything changed began like hundreds before it. Pale sunlight spilled across my tiny apartment in Brooklyn, painting long golden lines over the hardwood floor that creaked every winter. The old radiator hummed softly beneath the window while the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the kitchen. I slipped the familiar silver ring onto my right hand before doing anything else. It had belonged to my grandmother, then to my mother, and finally to me. Nobody had ever explained where it came from. Whenever I asked, Grandma would simply smile and say that some answers arrived only when the right people found you. At 26 years old, I had decided that was simply another family saying meant to sound mysterious. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy blazer, grabbed my leather tote, and hurried toward the subway station. Manhattan greeted me with its usual rhythm. Taxi horns echoed between towering buildings. Steam drifted from street vents. People hurried past each other without making eye contact, each carrying invisible worries that looked heavier than their briefcases. I worked as an event coordinator for a nonprofit arts foundation. Most days were filled with schedules, donor calls, and endless cups of coffee that went cold before I remembered to drink them. It was an ordinary life, and I liked it that way. Around noon, my supervisor reminded me that I would represent the foundation at an evening charity gala hosted inside one of the city's oldest hotels. I almost protested. Fancy events were never my strength. Expensive dresses, polished conversations, and people who somehow looked comfortable under crystal chandeliers always made me feel like an accidental guest. Still, work was work. By 7 o'clock, I stood beneath a ceiling that glittered with thousands of tiny lights, wearing the only black dress I considered formal enough. Soft violin music floated through the ballroom, while waiters moved between marble columns carrying silver trays filled with sparkling water and elegant desserts. I caught myself twisting the ring whenever I felt nervous, just as I always had. Across the room, conversations paused for reasons I could not understand. Heads turned toward the entrance. A tall man stepped inside surrounded by quiet confidence instead of security guards. His charcoal suit fit perfectly, but it was not the tailoring that caught everyone's attention. It was the way silence seemed to follow him. He moved slowly, greeting people with measured nods rather than smiles. His dark hair reflected the warm chandelier light, and his calm blue eyes swept across the ballroom with practiced precision until they stopped on me. Everything else seemed to disappear. The music faded. The conversations blurred. For one impossible heartbeat, he looked less surprised to see me than devastated. His gaze never left my face. Then it dropped to the silver ring resting against my fingers. The color drained from his expression. He took one slow step forward, as though he had just recognized something he had spent years searching for, and I felt a chill travel down my spine even though the ballroom was warm. I had never seen that man before in my life. Yet somehow, the look in his eyes felt like the beginning of a story that had started long before I was born. My pulse refused to slow even after I looked away. I told myself I was imagining things because nobody could possibly react to an old family ring with that kind of expression. I picked up another folder from the registration table and forced a polite smile as guests continued arriving beneath the crystal chandeliers. The orchestra resumed its gentle melody as though nothing unusual had happened, yet I could still feel his eyes following me through the crowd. I focused on introducing donors, answering questions about scholarship programs, and pretending my hands were not trembling every time I adjusted the silver band. Nearly 20 minutes passed before I finally convinced myself I had overreacted. Then a quiet voice interrupted my thoughts. "Miss Carter." I turned to find an older gentleman wearing an immaculate tuxedo and a warm expression. "Mr. Moretti would appreciate a brief conversation if you have a moment." I glanced across the ballroom. The tall stranger stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. City lights reflected behind him like scattered stars. He was alone now, one hand resting lightly in his pocket, his posture calm enough to make everyone else seem restless by comparison. Every instinct suggested I politely decline, but professional courtesy won. I crossed the ballroom with measured steps, reminding myself that I was speaking to another guest and nothing more. When I stopped a few feet away, he looked directly into my eyes instead of offering his hand. His expression remained composed, but something deeper lingered beneath it, something that looked remarkably close to disbelief. "Thank you for coming over," he said. His voice was low, steady, and unmistakably American with the faintest trace of an old Italian family heritage. "I apologize if I interrupted your evening." "Not at all," I answered carefully. "Have we met before?" A faint smile appeared but disappeared almost immediately. "I was about to ask you the same question." The silence stretched between us. Around us, glasses clinked softly and quiet laughter drifted through the ballroom, but it all seemed strangely distant. His attention shifted from my face to my right hand. "May I ask you something?" he said. I nodded. "Where did you get that ring?" The question was simple, yet the weight behind it caught me completely off guard. I glanced down at the silver band that I had worn almost every day since my grandmother passed away. "It belonged to my family," I replied. "My grandmother gave it to me when I turned 18. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he studied the ring with remarkable focus, as though memorizing details no one else could see. "Did she ever tell you where it came from?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "Only that it had always belonged to our family." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Did she mention the name Moretti?" "The name meant nothing to me," I answered honestly. "No. Should it?" For the first time, genuine surprise crossed his face. He looked toward the ballroom entrance, then toward several guests standing nearby, as though silently confirming something only he understood. When he turned back to me, his expression had become careful again. "Forgive me," he said. "I asked because your ring resembles one I believed had disappeared many years ago." Before I could ask another question, a waiter approached to announce that the evening program was about to begin. I excused myself and walked toward the stage, but the conversation stayed with me long after the applause filled the ballroom. As I stepped beneath the bright lights to welcome the guests, I noticed something that made the uneasy feeling return. Two unfamiliar men stood near opposite exits, neither speaking nor participating in the event. They were not watching the stage. They were watching me. And every few seconds, their attention drifted to the silver ring resting quietly on my hand. The applause faded into comfortable conversation, but I could not shake the feeling that something invisible had shifted around me. I smiled through the remainder of the presentation, thanked our sponsors, answered questions about future community projects, and accepted compliments that barely registered in my mind. Every time I glanced toward the ballroom entrance, the same two unfamiliar men remained there. They never approached anyone. They never picked up a drink. They simply observed the room with patient expressions that made my stomach tighten. I told myself they were private security hired by one of the wealthy guests. That explanation should have been enough. Somehow it was not. Nearly an hour later, the gala began winding down. Guests exchanged final handshakes beneath the sparkling chandeliers, while hotel staff quietly cleared empty glasses from marble tables. I slipped outside onto the rooftop terrace, hoping the cool October air would settle my thoughts. The city stretched before me in every direction. Countless windows glowed against the dark sky, while traffic flowed through Manhattan like rivers of white and red light. For the first time that evening, I could hear my own breathing. "You needed a quieter place too?" His voice came from behind me, calm enough that I did not jump. Adrian Moretti stepped onto the terrace without hurry, closing the glass door gently behind him. He stopped several feet away instead of invading my space. I appreciated that more than I expected. Long evenings are not really my specialty, I admitted with a nervous smile. He nodded slightly. "Neither are mine." The silence between us felt different now, less uncomfortable, more careful. He rested his hands in the pockets of his tailored coat while looking across the skyline instead of directly at me. "Emily," he said after a moment, speaking my name with unusual certainty. "I would like to ask you one more question." "All right. Has anyone besides your grandmother ever shown interest in that ring?" I thought about it before answering. "Never. Most people do not even notice it." His expression grew thoughtful. "That may have changed tonight." A breeze lifted a few strands of my hair as I looked down at the silver band again. It suddenly seemed heavier than it had that morning. "You keep saying things that make it sound important," I said quietly. "But you never explain why." Adrian looked at me for several long seconds before answering. "Because I am not completely certain yet. Guessing could place you in unnecessary danger, and I do not make decisions based on guesses." His honesty surprised me more than another vague answer would have. Before I could respond, The terrace door opened again. One of the older gentlemen from earlier approached Adrian with polite urgency. He leaned close enough to whisper something I could not hear. Adrian's expression remained calm, but I noticed the smallest change in his eyes. They became sharper, more alert. He looked toward the ballroom through the glass wall, then toward the street nearly 20 stories below. Finally, he turned back to me. "Emily, when you leave tonight, do not walk home alone." I blinked in confusion. I was planning to take the subway. "Please do not." There was no command in his voice, only quiet concern. "Allow my driver to take you home." "That really is not necessary." "I hope you are right," he answered gently. "I truly do." Before I could refuse again, my phone vibrated inside my purse. A text message appeared from an unknown number. It contained only one sentence. "We know who wears the ring now." My hands turned cold as I stared at the screen. When I looked up again, Adrian had already seen the fear on my face, and somehow he seemed far less surprised than I was. My eyes stayed locked on the message until the screen dimmed in my hand. The words were simple, almost polite, yet they carried a certainty that settled deep inside my chest. Someone knew about the ring. Someone knew I was wearing it. I looked up at Adrian, searching his face for reassurance, but what I found instead was recognition. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition. He held out his hand without rushing me. "May I see your phone?" he asked quietly. I hesitated for only a second before placing it in his hand. He studied the message carefully, then looked at the unfamiliar number. Without changing his calm expression, he handed the phone back to me. "Do not reply," he said. "Do not block the number either." "Who would send something like this?" I asked. "Someone who wants you to know they are watching." The words should have terrified me, yet the steady tone of his voice somehow made them easier to hear. He was not trying to frighten me. He was stating a fact. The terrace door opened once more as the older gentleman returned. This time he remained several feet away. Adrian acknowledged him with the slightest nod before turning back to me. "Emily, your apartment is in Brooklyn, correct?" I stared at him. "How do you know where I live?" His expression softened slightly. "Because before I invited you to speak tonight, I verified that you worked for the foundation. Basic security, nothing more. Under different circumstances, I might have found that unsettling. Tonight it felt strangely reasonable." The city below continued moving as though nothing unusual had happened. Yellow taxis crossed intersections. Office lights blinked out one floor at a time. Somewhere below, a siren echoed briefly before disappearing into the distance. Ordinary life continued while mine quietly became something else. "I cannot ask you to trust me after only one conversation," Adrian said, "but I am asking you to let my driver take you home." I thought about refusing again. Independence had always been important to me. My grandmother raised me to solve my own problems, to stand on my own feet, and never depend on strangers. Yet the anonymous message remained glowing in my memory. Finally, I nodded once. "Just tonight." Relief flickered across his face so quickly I almost missed it. We walked back into the ballroom together. Most of the guests had already left, leaving only hotel employees folding table linens and collecting floral arrangements. Nobody paid much attention to us except the two unfamiliar men near the exits. The moment they noticed Adrian beside me, they exchanged a brief glance before quietly leaving through separate doors. I watched them disappear into the hallway. "Were they with you?" I asked. "No," Adrian answered immediately. "I was hoping they were." That answer chilled me more than the text message. Outside, a black luxury sedan waited beneath the hotel entrance canopy. The driver stepped out and opened the rear passenger door with professional courtesy. Adrian remained on the sidewalk instead of getting inside. "You are not coming?" I asked. "No. If anyone is watching this hotel, they expect me to leave with you. I would rather disappoint them." I climbed into the back seat, still trying to understand what kind of world I had stepped into. As the car pulled away from the hotel, I looked through the rear window one last time. Adrian had not moved. He stood beneath the warm lights of the entrance, watching the traffic instead of the departing car, as though he expected something else to happen. 5 minutes later, while we crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, I noticed the same dark gray sport utility vehicle behind us for the third time. It stayed exactly 3 car lengths back through every lane change, every traffic light, and every turn, never getting closer, never falling behind. The dark gray sport utility vehicle remained behind us long enough that coincidence no longer felt believable. I tried to focus on the lights reflecting across the East River, but every glance into the side mirror brought the same vehicle back into view. The driver noticed it too. He never mentioned it aloud. Instead, he adjusted our route with quiet confidence, taking a different exit than the navigation screen suggested before turning onto a wider avenue lined with late-night cafes and apartment buildings. The sport utility vehicle followed. My heartbeat grew louder than the engine. "Is everything all right?" I finally asked. The driver met my eyes briefly through the rearview mirror. "Please remain calm, Miss Carter." His voice stayed remarkably steady. "Mr. Moretti asked me to get you home safely. That is exactly what I intend to do." I looked down at the silver ring resting against my fingers. Only that morning it had been nothing more than a treasured family keepsake. Now it seemed to carry questions that stretched far beyond my own life. I remembered my grandmother polishing it with a soft cloth every Sunday afternoon. She had never treated it like jewelry. She treated it like a promise. Suddenly, memories I had dismissed for years returned with surprising clarity. The locked wooden box she never allowed anyone else to open. The old black and white photograph she always tucked away before I entered the room. The quiet sentence she repeated every birthday. "Some things find you when the time is right." At the time, I thought she was speaking about dreams. Maybe she had been speaking about this night instead. The driver turned into my neighborhood, but instead of slowing near my apartment building, he continued another block before circling back. He checked every intersection with careful attention before finally stopping beneath the streetlight outside my building. "We are here," he said. "Would you like me to walk you inside?" I almost declined out of habit, then remembered the message on my phone. "Yes," I answered softly. The cool night air greeted us as we stepped onto the sidewalk. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. A young couple laughed while walking their dog. Someone across the street carried grocery bags into a brownstone. A bicycle rolled quietly past. Nothing looked threatening, yet I could not shake the feeling of unseen eyes. We reached the front entrance. I searched my purse for my keys while the driver remained respectfully a few steps behind. As I unlocked the door, something caught my attention. Resting neatly on the welcome mat was a small white envelope with my name written across the front in elegant handwriting. I knew immediately that I had not left it there. My fingers hesitated before picking it up. Inside was a single cream-colored card. No signature. No return address. Only one sentence printed in dark ink. "The ring remembers its rightful family. We will come for it soon." A faint metallic sound echoed behind me. I turned instinctively toward the street. The dark gray sport utility vehicle rolled slowly past my building without stopping. Its windows remained too dark to see inside. It disappeared around the corner, leaving only silence behind. Before I could decide whether to call the police, my phone rang again. This time the screen displayed a name instead of an unknown number. Adrian Moretti. If you are enjoying this Mafia boss romance story, please like this video, share your thoughts or personal experiences in the comments, and stay with us until the very end because the biggest family secret has not been revealed yet. More unexpected twists, hidden identity mysteries, and emotional suspense are still waiting ahead. My thumb hovered over the answer button for only a moment before I accepted the call. "Emily," Adrian said, his voice as calm as it had been at the gala. "Are you inside your building?" I glanced toward the apartment entrance. "Not yet. Please go inside now. Lock your apartment door and do not open it for anyone tonight unless you hear my voice first." His words were measured, not dramatic, and somehow that made them far more convincing. I thanked the driver before stepping into the lobby. The familiar scent of polished wood and old paint usually made me feel at home. Tonight it felt strangely unfamiliar. Every sound echoed a little louder. Every shadow seemed a little longer. I hurried upstairs, unlocked my apartment, and secured every lock behind me before finally answering the question that had been growing inside my mind all evening. "Tell me the truth," I said quietly. "Why does everyone care about this ring?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him choosing each word carefully. "Because your grandmother protected something that many people believed had disappeared forever." I sat down on the edge of my couch, still holding the cream-colored card in one hand and the phone in the other. Rain began tapping softly against the living room window. "Protected what?" I asked. "A promise," Adrian answered. "And possibly the last surviving proof of a family history that someone worked very hard to erase." I frowned. "I do not understand." Neither did I, he admitted, until I saw you tonight. He explained that decades earlier, before he inherited his family's business empire, an important member of the Moretti family had vanished during a series of events that remained unexplained even within the family itself. Along with that disappearance, a distinctive silver ring also vanished. Older relatives believed the ring represented far more than jewelry. It symbolized trust between two families whose names had slowly disappeared from public records. Every search had ended the same way. No answers, no witnesses, only silence. And you believe my grandmother somehow became involved? I asked. I believe she knew the truth, Adrian replied. The question is whether she left that truth for you to find. My eyes drifted toward the old oak bookshelf beside the window. On its highest shelf rested a small wooden box that had belonged to Grandma for as long as I could remember. I had moved it into my apartment after she passed away, but I had never managed to open it. The tiny brass key had disappeared years earlier. There is something, I whispered almost to myself. A locked box. Adrian immediately noticed the change in my voice. What kind of box? Old oak. Hand-carved. My grandmother never let anyone touch it. Silence filled the line again, but this time it felt hopeful instead of uncertain. Emily, he said gently, do not try to force it open tonight. If that box contains what I think it might, it deserves careful attention. I stood and walked toward the shelf anyway. Running my fingers across the carved lid, I noticed something I had somehow overlooked for years. A tiny engraving decorated one corner of the wood. It matched the delicate pattern carved into my silver ring perfectly. My heartbeat quickened. Without thinking, I placed the ring against the engraving. A soft click echoed through the quiet apartment. Neither the box nor the ring had needed a key at all. They had been waiting for each other. The lid lifted only half an inch before I stopped. My hand froze against the smooth wood as though some forgotten instinct had whispered for patience. Adrian, I said softly into the phone. It opened. I heard him exhale slowly, not with relief, but with the quiet realization that years of unanswered questions might finally have somewhere to begin. Do not touch anything inside until I get there, he said. You are coming here? I asked. Yes. It is almost midnight. That does not matter. His answer came without hesitation. Some moments are worth crossing an entire city for. I looked out the rain-covered window toward the glowing skyline. Less than 6 hours earlier, Adrian Moretti had been a stranger whose name meant nothing to me. Now his voice had become the one thing keeping my thoughts from unraveling. I gently raised the lid another inch. Inside rested a folded ivory letter tied with a faded blue ribbon, a black and white photograph, and a small velvet pouch no larger than my palm. Nothing looked valuable in the ordinary sense. Yet every item carried the careful arrangement of someone who had expected another pair of hands to find them one day. I resisted every urge to untie the ribbon. Instead, I closed the lid exactly as I had found it. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across my apartment windows. A quiet knock followed almost immediately. I looked through the peephole before unlocking the door. Adrian stood alone in the hallway wearing a dark wool coat dampened by the rain. He did not step inside until I nodded. The apartment suddenly felt much smaller than it had that morning. He glanced around with respectful curiosity, noticing family photographs, overflowing bookshelves, and the small collection of potted plants near the kitchen window. This feels like your grandmother, he said unexpectedly. I smiled despite everything. You never met her? No, he replied. But people leave pieces of themselves in the places they love. His words reminded me of something she once told me, and for the first time that night, the fear inside me softened into something closer to hope. We carried the wooden box to the dining table beneath the warm light hanging overhead. Adrian never reached toward it. Instead, he looked at me. It belongs to your family. You should be the one to open it. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the lid again. The photograph lay on top. It showed two young women standing beside a lake sometime in the late 1980s. One was unmistakably my grandmother decades before I was born. The other woman smiled with remarkable confidence while wearing an elegant white dress. Around her right hand rested the exact same silver ring I wore now. Adrian leaned closer. His expression changed the instant he recognized her face. I know who she is, he whispered. You do? She was my aunt. I looked from the photograph to Adrian in complete disbelief. That is impossible. It should be, he answered quietly. Everyone in my family believed she disappeared without leaving a trace. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Rain continued tapping against the windows while the apartment settled into midnight silence. Finally, I untied the faded blue ribbon around the letter and unfolded the fragile paper. The handwriting belonged to my grandmother. The first sentence was addressed directly to me. Dear Emily, if you are reading this, it means the Moretti family has finally found you, and the truth can no longer remain hidden. My hands trembled as I unfolded the fragile letter, careful not to damage the faded paper that had survived decades in silence. The ink had softened with age, but every word remained clear, as though my grandmother had known this exact night would eventually arrive. Dear Emily, if you are reading this, then the truth has finally caught up with our family. Do not be afraid of the people who come searching with honest hearts. Be careful only of those who search for power instead of truth. I swallowed hard before continuing. The apartment felt impossibly quiet except for the steady rain against the windows. Adrian stood across the table without interrupting me once. He watched the letter with the same respect someone might give a family photograph or a treasured memory. I continued reading aloud. Many years ago, a young woman asked me for help. She was frightened, exhausted, and carrying a burden that did not belong to her alone. She trusted me with something precious because she believed kindness would protect it longer than wealth or influence ever could. She was right. Adrian slowly lowered his eyes. He already knew who that woman had been. I continued. She wanted the ring to disappear until the day someone worthy came looking for it, someone who valued people more than power. If that person is standing beside you now, then history still has a chance to heal. I looked up from the letter. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, Adrian broke the silence. My aunt believed promises mattered more than possessions, he said quietly. That sounds exactly like her. I looked back at the page. Beneath the letter rested the small velvet pouch. This time, Adrian nodded gently, giving me permission without saying a word. I loosened the drawstring and carefully poured its contents onto the wooden table. A tiny silver key slid into the light beside an old brass medallion engraved with the same intricate design that circled my ring. Folded beneath them was a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline announced the unexplained disappearance of Isabella Moretti almost 30 years earlier. The article described endless speculation, but no confirmed answers. There was one photograph beside the story. It was the same smiling woman from the picture inside the box. My grandmother had preserved every piece of evidence without ever revealing it to anyone. Adrian carefully picked up the brass medallion, turning it over in his hand. His expression shifted almost immediately. This is not just a family symbol, he said. These markings are coordinates. I leaned closer. Tiny engraved numbers formed a pattern around the edge that I had mistaken for decoration. Adrian reached for his phone and entered them into a map application. A single location appeared almost instantly. Neither of us recognized the address, but the satellite image revealed an old lakeside property several hours north of New York City. My heartbeat quickened again. Do you think she wanted us to go there? I asked. Adrian looked from the map to the letter still resting on the table. I think she expected us to. Before either of us could say another word, another folded page slipped from inside the envelope and drifted quietly onto the floor. I bent down and picked it up. Unlike the first letter, this page contained only one handwritten sentence. Trust no one whose name already appears inside the Moretti family. I read the final sentence 3 more times before the meaning settled over the room like the quiet rain beyond my windows. Trust no one whose name already appears inside the Moretti family. I slowly lowered the page and looked at Adrian. He did not defend his family. He did not dismiss my grandmother's warning. Instead, he nodded once with the expression of someone who had feared those exact words for years. She was trying to protect you, he said. And perhaps she was trying to protect me as well. I searched his face for doubt, but found only honesty. If I cannot trust your family, I asked softly, how do I know I can trust you? He looked down at the silver ring resting on my hand before meeting my eyes again. Because I did not come searching for the ring, he answered. I came searching for the truth. Tonight, I simply discovered they were the same thing. The simplicity of his answer carried more weight than any promise could have. I folded my grandmother's letter with careful hands and returned it to the wooden box beside the photograph and the small brass medallion. None of these things belonged hidden in darkness anymore. They belonged to a story that had finally begun to breathe again. Adrian studied the map one last time before placing his phone on the table. "We leave at sunrise," he said. "The property by the lake may hold the last pieces of your grandmother's secret. If we wait too long, someone else may reach it." First, I looked around my apartment, suddenly aware that it no longer felt like the small, ordinary home I had left that morning. Every bookshelf, every framed photograph, every memory had quietly become part of something much larger than my own life. Fear still lived inside me, but it no longer stood alone. Curiosity stood beside it. So did hope. I walked toward the window, overlooking the sleeping streets of Brooklyn. The rain had almost stopped. Clouds drifted apart just enough for a few stars to appear above the skyline. My grandmother used to tell me that the hardest journeys rarely began with a map. They began with a single decision to keep walking when turning back seemed easier. I slipped the silver ring from my finger for the first time in years and held it in my palm. It reflected the city lights with a quiet glow that seemed almost alive. For decades it had carried promises I never understood. Tonight, those promises had finally found me. I placed the ring back onto my finger, not because I wanted answers anymore, but because I was finally ready to carry them. Adrian stepped beside me without speaking. Together we looked toward the city where strangers, secrets, and unfinished history waited for the morning. Somewhere beyond those lights stood people who wanted the ring for reasons my grandmother had spent a lifetime protecting. Somewhere beyond them waited the truth that had connected our families long before either of us was born. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing with complete certainty. My ordinary life had ended the moment our paths crossed, and for the first time, I was no longer afraid of discovering who I was truly meant to become. If you enjoyed this emotional mafia boss romance filled with hidden family secrets, mysterious heirlooms, and unforgettable plot twists, please subscribe to the channel. Like this video, leave a comment sharing your theories or personal thoughts, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. If you love mafia romance, hidden identity, family mystery, cinematic storytelling, and emotional love stories, continue watching the next video on this channel because another unforgettable journey is waiting for you. Thank you sincerely for watching, and I cannot wait to share the next story with you.